Hi, welcome to the latest episode of the Wellbeing Show. I've got a great guest who's joining me from Orange County in California. Her name's Meg Appelgate. And she'll be talking to us about the troubled teen industry, which is not something we know much about in the UK. But people may have come across it through some of the stuff Paris Hilton has been doing. I think she's been sort of doing a sterling job at sort of highlighting some of the problems that exist in that field and some of our own personal experience. And we've invited Meg on today, who's written about it and is an advocate for people who have survived those experiences, and she's been through those experiences herself. So she's well placed to discuss it. And so with that, without further ado, I'm going to say hi to Meg. Welcome. It's pretty early where you are, I think.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for having me, though. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to be here. California is one of my favorite places, to be
It's
honest.
beautiful. It really
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
I love how there's no extremes. You're not going to walk out and see snow, and you're not going to walk out and get like 120-degree heat. So
yeah.
you're pretty moderate all the time.
But it is also because it's a long and narrow sort of
Mm,
state, and then
yeah.
inland it does go up into the mountains.
Yeah. Up in the mountains in Mammoth and stuff like that, you can definitely get the snow in the winter.
Yeah,
But Orange County, it's pretty amazing actually, because it's the only place I've ever been to where you can be at the beach and in the background see mountains with snow.
I know.
So it's
Yeah,
it's pretty cool.
yeah. And it's one of those places where literally, if you want to do this, you can go ski in the morning,
For sure.
get in a car, rush down to the beach, and then go
Correct. You
surf.
can snowboard and you can go surfing in the same day.
It's quite extraordinary. That's the California lifestyle. It's also very healthy, health conscious, and
Yes.
very
Yep.
smiley. But there's also some dark edges to it. So,
There
did you
is.
grow up in California? Is that your home birth state?
I grew up a long time in California. However, I really spent the first part of my life in Wisconsin, so in the Midwest.
Okay.
And then I moved to Arizona and then to into Newport Beach, California, Orange County.
Okay.
Um, but I stayed there for a while before going into the troubled teen industry. And then after the troubled teen industry, I kind of found myself back here.
Yeah, like to sort of to recover, as it were, and
Exactly. Yes.
you build your life. So tell me about sort of where you grew up and what that was like, because the US and particularly those parts of the US are a little bit alien to people in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, all over the US are going to be different, and all over California, you're going to have kind of different feels. I think in Southern California, it can be hit or miss.
Mhm.
Southern California can be kind of materialistic, focused on the wrong types of things in life, at
Mhm.
least in my, from my perspective, the wrong types of things. A
Mhm.
focus on how you look is pretty like heavily emphasized. And so I luckily though, while in Orange County, grew up around people that really had good character. My parents and all of their friends provided an environment where I could really focus on the things that mattered and the character that mattered.
Mhm.
So I was provided that environment, but it was in an area where all my friends and their families operated a bit differently. So I got that when I go to school and with friends, and then I'd come home to a different feel, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
So
What would you come home to then, typically? What was it sort of like?
it was just your typical 90s childhood, where you come home, you put your backpack down, you grab a snack, and then you go out and play with the neighbor kids until the street lights come on.
Yeah.
And it was very much so just always out having fun. And, um, you know, it was fun, and it was also healthy, and I felt safe and secure. So I'm thankful that I got those elements of it.
Great. And you grew up with siblings or just yourself and your parents?
So I'm adopted
Right.
at birth.
Mm.
But I grew up with a brother who is 6 years older than me. So even though I had a brother, he's so much older that it was at times almost like I was an only child,
Mhm.
but only that one brother and then my mom and my dad.
Yeah. And what was school like for you? Were you happy there, or I mean, we
Oh
get
my gosh.
we get sort of television versions of it, and we don't.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I have to say about Southern California and their schools. It doesn't matter if it's private school or public school, they can be brutal.
Okay.
And when I say brutal, I mean heavy bullying, very heavy bullying. And I was one of the ones that was heavily bullied constantly. And I'd say from the ages of probably 10 to 15, I came home like every day crying
Hmm.
and just feeling completely tortured at school. So, socially, I really, really struggled. I wanted to have friends. I'd have friends and then they'd like turn on me and all of a sudden not want to be friends
Yeah.
and then they'd be the bullies. It was a horrible situation and created a lot of trauma, to be honest.
It is something I've heard about a lot, and because you like in the movies and on the TV, you get this sort of relatively sanitized, idyllic
Yeah.
version. But it is something I've heard a lot about from people about these
Does it
schools.
not happen really in the UK as much?
Bullying definitely happens without a doubt. It's not as systemic and accepted, I would
Wow.
say. Definitely, schools like to deny it exists, but most
Yeah,
good schools will have anti-bullying policies and will follow through on them. And so there have been sort of high-profile cases. So, but it seems to me in US schools, it's much more tolerated, the sort of social exclusion and isolation and picking on people.
yeah,
And schools don't necessarily have structured policies or interventions around. Um,
correct. Yeah.
and
And even if they do, a lot of times they prioritize profit over those policies. So
yeah,
if you have private schools that they'll almost always have anti-bullying, policies because actually I believe that the police forces around here actually have like policies as well, where if there's bullying going on, they have like a task force or whatever. But the problem is that if you're paying a ton of money per year for your kid and they're bullying and it's going against policies, a lot of times they'll turn their head
mhm.
because that's income that they're going to be not getting anymore if they follow through with the policy and expel the child.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, there is some talk, and this is not to justify or rationalize in any way these behaviors, but there's some talk about these kids that go on the mass shootings were very
Mm,
often had atrocious experiences in school,
yeah,
and
very
they
much so.
turned into very angry young men. It is also, I think, the problem is you have access to weapons in America, and so you're going to
Right, correct,
use.
correct.
So it's the fact that people have access to the weapons, which is the problem. But also,
Correct.
if you then sort of link that into this sort of exclusion, bullying, and this sort of stuff, and there is, I think, a different because state to state it varies in the US, doesn't it? But it's almost like some states are almost like different countries to each other, aren't they?
Yes, especially now. There is a very huge difference between states. Even if you look 10 years ago, like it was much more united, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. But it's very divided right now. Yeah. It's like a
Yeah.
different country. And you think about it before you go into that state. You think, is this going to be good for my mental health? Is this safe for me to travel in this state?
Sure.
And every American, regardless of their situations, they have to like take that into account and be like, is it okay for me to travel here right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of people I know who are, say, from LGBTQ plus
Correct. Yeah.
who are very cautious about going to some states.
100%.
They won't
And
go
they
to
should be.
Florida and etc. They just are, you know, and also a number of friends that might be being dramatic. I don't think they'll need to do this, but they're planning an escape and coming
Yeah. Well, I would be lying if I said I have not thought about that and had it in my
yourself.
plan C because it has been a worry in the past couple of years.
I'm sure. I'm sure it has. We're going through troubled times in the UK at the moment. There's a bit of a backlash going on from
Oh,
uh,
okay.
so quite a lot of violence on the streets at the moment from sort of far right sort of thugs, basically, sort of
Oh
thugs.
gosh. Well,
Well,
so a little bit of the same then
the
over here.
police are responding to and the government's responding to, so I'm
Oh,
sure
good.
fairly sure they'll clear it up fairly quickly. Slightly different, I think, in the sense of I think um, in the US, Trump previously supported that behaviour,
Correct.
and your current government doesn't, and hopefully your next government won't as well. So fingers crossed.
Let's hope so.
Fingers
'Cause
crossed on that one. But
I
let's segue
cannot live in another
somewhere
Trump
else.
world.
Let's come back to this. So You had like your parents were kind, they looked after you,
Yes.
but the school system seems to have had a sort of negative impact upon you and failed you in many ways.
Yeah, and I think that, not only in the school system, but really the mental health system in general.
Okay.
I think that, I was undiagnosed autistic at that point. I didn't get my
Ah,
diagnosis
okay,
until a few
right.
years ago. And so psychologists kind of, I slipped through the cracks, schools,
Yeah,
I slipped through the cracks. And the issue, especially then, but still now, is that these systems, when there's a child that's in need and needs greater support systems, they tend to pathologize lots of behaviors, and they say, oh well, she's skipping out on school, she's troubled, and they get those labels. And then what happens is the parents start getting very worried,
yeah,
and they start getting, oh my gosh, like, is
yeah,
she going to die? And they're being told I'm going to die if they don't do something. And this happens so often. And we're, as humans, we're really, for lack of a better term, groomed to believe the quote professionals in the
yeah,
room, right? If there's a psychologist saying you should be worried, you're going to listen automatically. And it takes a lot to be like, I'm going to go fact check this, or I'm going to go do some research to see if this person's correct. And so I think that it's a really big health crisis right now, is pathologization of adolescents and youth, and turning very normal behaviors and expected behaviors, they might be scary, but they're expected in normal development,
yeah.
and making parents scared.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I mean, there's a thing in the US, and I'm not going to criticize specifically the US or any system, but there's
Hmm.
big differences between the UK, European systems, and the US systems. And I work in both, and I'm not pointing fingers, but there are big differences. And one of the things is the need for things like DSM codes, which I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, correct.
DSM is, for people that don't know, is a book which lists diagnoses, and you get codes next to a diagnosis. So I forget the diagnosis, the code for. So if you diagnose with depression, there'll be a code, so D something or other.
Yeah.
And then the clinician who diagnoses it gives that to the patient and or their insurance rep. And then the insurance company decide what amount of money they're going to pay for how long for that diagnosis.
Yeah.
And that's how people make money in the US. Whereas
Right.
in the UK, it's a slightly different system. There is a private sector, and I'm part of it, but it doesn't use the same sort of system. And for the vast majority of people in the UK, I'm saying this for people who are listening in the UK because they won't understand this. That doesn't happen in the UK. You don't need these codes because we pay for our health services through our taxes. So there's a
It's
different
amazing.
motivation completely, right?
Yeah. I
And
mean,
so,
it,
go on.
I was going to say that you hit on something really important that ends up being exploited within the travel teen industry, which is these DSM-5 codes, right? And uh, what happens is these programs end up choosing the codes or the diagnoses that have the longest term of
That's right.
treatment needed,
That's
correct? Right? Like things like oppositional defiance disorder, which is really, you don't, I mean, that's being a teenager in my mind. Like every teenager has ODD, but the ones that is very hard to treat and takes a long
I was
time,
going to
because
say the
then,
cynic in me says it's really good if it's untreatable.
yeah,
That's,
exactly.
that's a
Exactly.
cash cow for the rest of your
And
life.
that's why you're seeing more trouble teen industry facilities pop up that are for autism. Because guess what?
Well,
You
it's
can't
exactly.
cure autism,
What are you
And
treating
so
in autism?
exactly.
Seriously, it's a
Exactly.
neurodiversity. There's no
Exactly.
treatment. It's a
Yeah.
disability. You have to
Yep.
adapt the world to the autism.
Right.
Let's
The
come
same
back.
thing with conversion
I
disorder,
know. We'll
conversion
come back to
therapy
that
as
in a
well.
minute. Don't get me on that soapbox. It's like I'll lose the plot.
Yeah.
So coming back to the diagnosis of autism, I think one of the things that's interesting and I think is important is the underdiagnosis of autism in women. I say
Yes.
you,
100%.
so you're happy for me to call you a woman, um,
Hmm.
and because it presents differently in women because of gender stereotyping.
Yep.
So the I mean, I was just literally talking to a good friend of mine the other day because she has ASD as well, and she's only recently got the diagnosis. And she said, "Yeah, I don't have a problem looking in people's eyes because I've been trained to do it.
Yeah.
I've been
Exactly.
required to do it as a girl.
Hmm.
I was
Yep.
forced to do it. If I didn't
Yep.
do it, I got a lot of stick for it. I got bullied."
Yes. Yeah.
Which,
And I think that that's very important to highlight, because I think that you know, as a woman, I think there's a higher chance that growing up we will have trauma than maybe the stereotypical man that grows
Yeah,
up in the same kind of situations. And what trauma does to someone with ASD is it makes it more likely that we'll mask. So females have a much higher rate of high masking behaviors, which
yeah,
make it appear to the other people that we're neurotypical when we're not. And so we end up functioning better in a neurotypical world if we have those masks. And so it reinforces itself. The problem is that we if we mask our entire life, we're going to start to see our world kind of tumble and we're start to not feel healthy when we're not being our authentic selves.
yeah. Because there are significant psychological damage that happens to an
Yeah.
autistic person who is forced to pretend. Do you need some water, Meg?
Oh, yeah, I probably
Grab
should.
yourself
Thank
some
you.
water, mate. Don't worry. It's a sort of free and easy show. You don't need to hide those things. It's okay. Because I don't think people understand that it's like trying to explain to people why it's important that people who have neurodiversity are allowed to do, for example, their rituals, because that helps manage some of the significant psychological distress that somebody's
Yes,
experiencing.
correct.
And if you don't, this was in the early days. My early training, this is 30 years ago, so I'm a really old fart in this field. But in my training, first year of training, I worked in a center for autism. This was people with very um, quite severe autistic traits. I mean, they
Oh, wow.
couldn't share a room and stuff like that with people. So, non-verbal, not pre-verbal, but just non-verbal because they didn't understand the need for
Yeah,
verbalizations. They weren't social, etc. And in those days, it was fairly typical to have a behavioral modification response.
right.
The idea being
Yep.
that you could use aversive techniques to frighten
Correct.
somebody to change their behavior. Did
Right.
you
Which
experience?
enforces masking, by the way.
That's right, exactly. That just terrorizes
Yeah,
people and creates
exactly.
PTSD because
Yep,
you
sure
feel like
does.
you're going to die.
Yep.
That's and you might die as well. I mean, you might end up killing yourself. So, are
Yeah,
those the types of sort of things that resonate with you that was happening for
absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I just got my diagnosis within the last 2 years, or actually
you? Oh,
almost
well done,
exactly.
Nick. Well done.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really happy.
Um,
That's great.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think if I look back at my time in the troubled teen industry, before I was diagnosed, I would have said, like, I don't really know why I was sent there, right? But now, after the diagnosis, I know why. It's because I was autistic and the tendencies that I had, the behaviors that I had, the not understanding social conformity and not understanding social interactions, it was all autism. And
Yeah,
so it created a new trauma that I was abused because I was autistic and not understood.
yeah,
And just that sadness of like, man, I just wish I could give that 15-year-old a hug and tell
yeah,
them that, tell her she's okay and she's
yeah,
perfect the way that she is. But all of the things that were, quote, not okay by my programs were all either things that I needed to be doing or just the way that I was, just
yeah,
the way I was. And so I had to end up fundamentally pretending like I wasn't who I was my entire life
yeah, yeah.
until I woke up, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So what's you were obviously targeted at school because you were different, and
Hmm.
that's what happens in schools where they don't have
Hmm.
effective policies.
Yep.
And you that made you more different because you then had to try and defend against that. And you must
Right.
have been desperately lonely, I imagine, Meg.
I
Very, very,
was. And it's interesting because you would think I would remember the things that were more of the autistic traits that were being made fun of.
yeah,
And I don't really remember those. I remember the physical ones. They used to make fun of me for being fat and ugly.
yeah,
I was neither, but they just made this up and it became a thing and it hurt my feelings. So then everyone started saying it. They made fun of me for being adopted. I remember clearly people saying to me, "No wonder your parents gave you up for adoption because you're so ugly, no one wanted you."
right.
Which I can't even imagine. Like, I have 4 kids, one of which is 11 years old. I can't imagine that coming out of an 11-year-old's brain. It's
Yeah, yeah,
it's just I don't understand.
yeah. But it is sort of understandable when we allow gangs to emerge.
Yeah.
And it's that gang culture, which I think is, I'm not talking about Crips and Bloods.
Right, right, right.
I'm talking about how people, in sort of psychoanalytic thought. It's called.
Yeah.
They talk about leaderless groups, and
Yeah.
they talk about basic assumption functioning. So splitting and pairing,
Yes. Yes.
rejection and attacking, and all these types of things. Which I mean, I'm a bit cautious about psychoanalytic thought, but sometimes
Right.
I think it's useful to think in those terms about how
Yeah.
it's a bit like. Have you ever seen that show, Big Brother?
No, wait, I think I've heard of it.
Reality TV shows, one of the early reality TV, like Love Island, but before
Oh,
Love.
maybe not. Maybe not. No.
So it's that reality show where they put a bunch of ordinary folk in a room and film them all the time, and they just go completely bonkers, right? And they
Well,
just
okay.
behave weirdly because that's what happens when you put people under that sort of spotlight. And that's
Right.
what will happen in groups, social groups, any social group. And we know that
Right.
there were a lot of experiments done in these types of groups in the 60s and 70s in
Right.
psychotherapy.
Yeah.
So
And I think if you look at the heart of, so to speak, of the bully itself, there's
yeah,
almost always going to be pain, right? And there's going to be
yeah,
some kind of trauma that they have. And I think it really, hurt people can hurt people. And I think
yeah.
that, you got to see it with compassion and understanding at least for where they're at.
Yeah, and there's group processes and social processes that need
Yeah.
intervention that will happen because we are heavily influenced by groups.
Correct.
Um,
Right.
People can
Needing to be
find
seen as
themselves
above.
getting
Yeah.
caught up in things that they then look
Right.
back on and go, "That wasn't me. How did I do?"
Exactly.
You know what I
Right.
mean? And there are just
Yeah.
these larger group processes. Things like, for example, what's called the bystander effect is
Oh, yes. Know that
yeah,
well.
loads on Facebook and all that sort of stuff, and where people will witness something that they find morally repugnant and do nothing about it
Right.
because of that group process has taken them over.
Hmm.
And so there's all that sort of stuff that goes on, I think. And one of the things I think is interesting about US society, and it probably is more so now, is there's such an emphasis on the individual rather than on the social,
Correct.
and that you have to individually strive to achieve something. That I think there's a level of denial about the need for intervention in the social and how important the social is and how much it needs some sort of regulation. And then I think we get to this point that you experienced, which was actually what was happening to you were processes of disabling processes.
Right. I think
Processes.
that,
Well,
yeah, I mean, when I was 15, I had obviously not felt like I'd fit in for a long time. My parents always made me feel fit in, like I fit in, but this was very self-imposed as being adopted. These aren't my parents. I don't belong. There's a lot of that going on. And I think when I got to high school, I just was desperate to find people that accepted me for who I was. And
yeah.
I found that in the counterculture kids and the kids that are smoking weed and the kids that are ditching school and, doing those cool things. And they accepted me.
Yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
I kind of found myself wrapped up in seeing my grades go down and having fun, skipping out on classes. And I drank a few times. I started being really interested in boys. All these things really concerned my parents.
Okay.
And it got to that point where, excuse me, where I ended up getting expelled
Yeah,
because I, left campus
yeah.
and drank a couple beers. And then I came back at the end of the day and I ended up getting expelled because I drank alcohol during school hours, not on campus,
Mhm.
but they have a zero tolerance policy at that time. They had just started where if you have any alcohol or drugs during the hours that school's in session, doesn't matter where in the world it is, you will be expelled from that school.
Okay.
Zero questions asked. So
Right.
I was one of those kids.
Okay. And that freaked your parents out.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is when it's the parents kind of wanting to know, what do I do? I feel trapped. Many times hire someone called an educational consultant. And these educational
So I knew
consultants,
you were going to use that. Another triggering word for me. I hate that word. These
yes, I know.
so-called educational.
Trust me, triggering
I've
for me
seen
too.
red.
It's
I've seen red. I just like, yeah. Right.
yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. I'm going
Yeah,
to take a
no,
break and let you get on
no,
with it.
no, no. So they hired this educational consultant who decided and collaborated with my parents and recommended that I go to a therapeutic boarding school. But this therapeutic boarding school wouldn't take, it's kind of strange. They don't take kids or girls unless they have been somewhere else before, whether that's a wilderness program, an RTC, some kind of treatment beforehand.
What's an
So
RTC?
A residential treatment center. So it's going to be, anywhere from probably 3 to 9 months, sometimes way more. But they wanted about anything from wilderness, which would be about 6 to 9 weeks, 12 weeks, something like that, all the way to 6 months. They just need some kind of pre-treatment. And so they decided on Intermountain Hospital in Boise, Idaho, which was a lockdown treatment facility. We're talking about like one flew over the cuckoo's nest kind
Mm.
of feeling where daily restraints, kids being thrown to the ground. And it was horrific for me because I had never seen a kid being handled by an adult. Like that was horrific to me. I had never witnessed that kind of stuff. And so I was kind of thrown into this crazy atmosphere, right? But so I spent 6 months there, which was a very long time for somewhere like that, and then was transferred over to the therapeutic boarding school where I spent another 3 years.
Sorry, I just
Yeah,
need to try and process that information. It's horrific.
it is.
It's
It is.
extraordinary that. And did you have, like in the UK, for the any hospital or any mental health services to have authority over you, they must have a legal position in which to do that. And it can't be given to them by your parents. They have to use mental health legislation. Did you have, and we would call it a Mental Health Act assessment. Um,
So this is going to blow your mind,
right,
but most of these programs require that parents sign over 50% custody to these places. So
right.
they really do many times have authority over the children.
So they get
It's
what's called parental responsibility now.
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just a simple process that the courts can do. There's no questions
I
about that.
I certainly don't remember any kind of like back and forth. It's extremely easy to do. And it's not only just here's my kid, there was also the act of being kidnapped from my bed in the middle of the night by two strangers that forced me across the country to Boise to put me there. So a lot of liability if you look at getting the kid from the home all the way to the facility with two people, sometimes
People may
handcuffs
not
are used.
understand. I
So,
know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah.
I know people this happened to. But let's go back on this. The people may be thinking you're a dramatic American,
Oh, yeah,
over the top about these things. She's not. Meg isn't. She's literally describing the process. Do you mind describing the process of what happened, or unless it's too upsetting to you?
Yeah,
I
no,
also
no,
want to
it's good.
say, if somebody's listening to this who's been through this and has unprocessed trauma, and you're upset listening to this, then it's okay that you're upset because it should be that you're upset
Mhm,
because what happened to you was wrong and all the treatment was wrong as well.
mhm.
And it's really important. It may bring up feelings of wanting to hurt yourself, and maybe even doing something more damaging and permanent to yourself. So what I'm going to say is that take a breath. There's lots of help out there. You're not alone, and we will be able to get help to you. If you're in the UK, and this has happened to you, and it has happened to some children in the UK. Their parents have pretended that they're going to Las Vegas for a holiday, and they've been kidnapped
Yeah.
at their hotel beds. So if you're in the UK, there is help through organisations like the Childline, Social Services, Papyrus. It's a great organisation, Samaritans, etc. There are plenty of organisations. If you're in the US, who would you suggest that people turn to, Meg, if they're having
Oh,
sort of
that's
triggering thoughts
that's
about this now?
yeah, that's even a loaded question too, because we want to be able to trust the call centers and it's hard to figure out the ones that don't refer to the same kind of programs that, you're triggered by. Um, I actually don't know offhand the ones that I would say are my top and to trust.
What we'll do with
Um,
Meg is I'll ask her to email this information to you.
yeah,
If
yeah,
you get to this point in the video, just have a look underneath the video and we'll have put some
correct. Yes.
resources there for you. But it's really important to understand and that Meg's just trying to be safe with you. She doesn't want to give you a hotline number that turn into people
Right,
give
right.
information to other people. That will. So, Meg, you're at home in bed. Your parents have done this stuff. I presume you don't know that they've done this,
Correct. Yeah, I
that
had no
they've
idea.
signed away authority for you to an organization. So, what happened? What actually happened?
So, as far as I knew before that point, I didn't know they were talking to anyone. I knew I had an educational consultant, but I had no idea what that would entail. So really, as far as I know, I was woken up around 1 or 2 a.m. and there was this big guy named Big John that woke me up and said, "You're coming with me." And I remember just being so scared. I'm like, "No, I'm not."
Oh,
Right. Initial instinct.
yeah.
And he said, "Well, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." And then I forget his exact words, but he indicated that the hard way meant handcuffs. And so I remember being like, okay, I'm going to go the easy way. And I said, well, can I go to the bathroom? And he's like, we have to watch you. And I said, can I get dressed? And he's like, we have to watch you. So they had to watch me get undressed to go to the bathroom. And I said, can I at least pack a bag? And that's when they said, your parents already did. And this whole time, my parents are at the door watching this entire thing go on. And my mom's crying
Mhm.
and she's saying things like, we're not abandoning you. We're not abandoning you. And when they told me that they had already packed the bag, that's when I flipped out, is when I realized this entire thing's planned. This
Mm.
was set up. My parents are literally getting rid of me, is what I felt. And I started screaming and cussing at them, telling them I'd never talk to them ever again. And at that point, they just like rushed me out, like they took my arms and rushed me out to the SUV. They threw me in the back, drove me to LAX airport, and I wasn't allowed to know where I was going, so I couldn't see my ticket, and they had to like face me away from the gate, and I couldn't see where I was going until I was on the plane when the pilot said, "We're on our way to Boise, Idaho." And that's when they gave me, when we're in flight, was when they gave me two letters, one from my mom and one from my dad, explaining like why this is happening. And I just remember completely disassociating. And I don't remember any of the trip. I don't remember arriving and any of that. I
Oh,
just
yeah.
remember walking into Intermountain Hospital and being petrified of what
Mm.
was going on.
Yeah. And you were there for how long in the hospital?
6 months, six
Right.
months in the hospital.
And did you get a diagnosis at that point? Did you
Oh
get
yeah,
legal
within days.
support? Right.
Within days.
What
Yeah.
did you get? What was the
I
diagnosis?
got bipolar diagnosis and they started me on super, super high amounts of medications that had me being a zombie for 6 months.
Yeah, of
I
course.
ended up gaining 60 pounds
Yeah.
in six
They put you
months.
on atypical
Yeah.
antipsychotics, which are very
Yep.
heavy. And how did you get a bipolar diagnosis without any episode of mania?
So they thought when I was happy, like they said that when I was, I'd go out of the house and smoke weed when I was in high school. They said that was mania.
It's
And
not
I'm like,
mania.
no, it's not mania. That's me being a kid.
Yeah.
And even
But
in my
mania
doctor's
happens
notes,
over days and days and days. It's not.
yeah, even in my notes, the doctor says, Meg maintains that she does not have bipolar disorder and that we have the wrong diagnosis. So even back then, I was saying this is not right. I don't have bipolar disorder. And they basically fear-mongered my parents and they said,
But who
this type of
diagnosed you with that without a clear indication of mania? I just
they
find it quite extraordinary.
I all I remember is they put these electrodes on my head and they had me look at this TV screen and did this weird EEG in a dark room. And then they were convinced that I had this specific type that would end up getting me pregnant before marriage. Like they told my parents this stuff. They said, she's highly precocious and she's this and she's that and she's going to end up pregnant. And my parents were like, "Oh my God, right? Here's this doctor telling us this." And they believed it. And really, it was ADHD and undiagnosed autism,
Mhm.
which you'd think that a residential treatment center would be able to tell the difference, but they did not.
But it's quite extraordinary, and must have been quite terrifying. We don't want to harbour on too much about it, but it is. And a lot of my work, to be honest, is I got a number of patients on the books who were still. We spent many years treating the trauma they get from treatment.
Yeah,
Um, and it's significantly horrific experience of treatment that is enforced. And I'm
yeah,
talking about people who've gone through legal processes in the UK, the Mental Health Act, etc. But even
yeah,
there, where there are safeguards, the treatment is worse than the condition.
right, correct. And I think the worst part of it, to be honest, and quite frankly, the reason why these programs are in certain states within America is because there are a higher concentration of these programs in states that don't have laws that protect children's rights.
Yes.
So the most horrific part was that here they're saying take these medications, and I had no choice.
Yeah.
And being a 15-year-old, I feel like you're old enough to decide, I don't want this in my body, or I don't agree, and
Yeah.
have the autonomy to make that decision. And that wouldn't happen in California. You can't just force someone to do
No,
that.
that's
But
right. And you shouldn't be
in
able to.
Idaho, you can. Right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And I think you're right. There are certain states that do tolerate these processes. And also there are certain states, and I was talking to a psychiatrist on this show a few weeks ago who had come from a Mormon family. He's a gay man. And they were horrified by him. Of course, he's, as far as they're concerned, the devil incarnate.
Right. Jeez,
Exactly. So,
it's ridiculous.
and he was talking about various states allow what's called conversion therapy in various states.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah.
things, I mean, I'm not going to dignify it with the word therapy,
Yeah.
conversion torture. Let's just call it what it
Correct.
is.
Yep.
It sort of like, again, I find it quite shocking as a mental health professional that people can lose their rights without any sort of legal framework whatsoever. It's extraordinary.
Right.
Um,
It's because
uh,
there's zero regulation for
yeah, yeah,
these
yeah,
at all.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely. So you're a child, you're facing horror and terror, and then you get transferred to a therapeutic community. Is that right? After,
Therapeutic boarding school is what we call them.
okay.
Yeah.
Was it therapeutic?
No, it's not
Right.
therapeutic at all, in my opinion.
All right.
It
What
was
does that mean, therapeutic, in that context?
therapeutic in the context that they're wanting it to be is that you take education and surround the child with a therapeutic environment, such as elements, even like horses and animals to promote healing, all the way to, a weekly therapist appointment with the staff, group therapy. Sometimes art therapy is involved, basically taking as many therapeutic components and surrounding education in it. So that's what distinguishes a therapeutic boarding school from a just stereotypical boarding school, which doesn't provide therapy and stuff like that. It's all about education and prep for, college and stuff like that. So
And
that's
were
kind of
you
what
given
distinguishes it.
choices in that boarding school? Were you allowed to come and go? Were you allowed to make decisions
No,
about treatments?
no, you
If
don't
you
get
were
any
not
choices.
compliant, what would happen to you?
So they believed heavily in behavior modification. So as most programs operate, they had a level system.
Yeah,
So you start off on the lowest level. If you quote work the program, then you get on a higher level and you get more privileges. And if you do something bad, they take away they
like
take away
prison.
levels. Yes. But on top of that, let's say it's not bad enough to lose a level. We had things called consequences, which were doled out for bad behaviors.
Yeah,
So basically, let's say I forgot to put a cup into the sink and I left it on the counter overnight, then maybe I would get a 30-minute consequence of shoveling manure
okay.
and or putting rocks in a wheelbarrow and moving it from one side of the yard to the other, something like that, right? Or washing logs, something like that.
And at this point, had any court of law taken away your right? Had you committed any crime?
Oh no. No, 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 no,
Had you been
no.
through a judicial process and due process,
No, 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 no.
like
I've never
deprive
seen
you
the
of
court system.
liberty?
No, no,
Had you
no.
been through a proper mental health assessment process using the law?
No, I mean, nothing involved with the law at all. In fact, all of these things that were abusive to me were dictated to my parents as being therapeutic, right? So this was the program. The consequences are a part of how I'm going to grow. All of it, like my parents were informed about, oh, she has a consequence today, but it was, or, she's doing work all day, but it's quote chores, right? So all of it was re-narrated in a way that makes
It's
it sound
difficult to
therapeutic.
understand, like, as a mental health professional, I'm trained in understanding that I have to put the needs of my patient first. Do no harm, the
Yeah,
Hippocratic Oath.
yeah, right.
That's it. I am legally obliged to do it. I do want to do it as a human being because I'm a decent human being, right?
Right,
But
right.
also I have a legal obligation. I'm regulated by a government body, right? And they will protect the public. Now, what I'd like to know is these so-called health professionals who were doing this therapy with you, were they aware that you'd committed no crime, that you'd not been
Oh
sanctioned
yeah,
by mental health legislation,
correct. They're aware.
and they were aware that you didn't want to do this, it wasn't a choice,
Correct.
and yet they still treated you.
If you didn't want to do it, that just made him dig in deeper and be harder on you
And
until you
these
did.
people are allowed to practice. They legally have the right to practice.
Yes, and in fact, my program, the program that I'm talking about, which is called Chrysalis, was in is in northern Montana, and at the time, those programs, believe it or not, were regulated by the Department of Labor, not even the Department of Health and Human Services. So it was literally not even, it didn't have any oversight. There was no one
What
checking
about
on the kids.
what about the regulation of the individual professional? Surely there are licensing boards. I mean, I guess you must have had a qualification to train to treat as an art therapist. You'd have to have an art therapy qualification, and you would have to be
Correct.
registered with some board or something.
You would think so. However, you'd be amazed how often it happens where you find out your therapist isn't licensed, and it's difficult because you would think there would be so many different, you know, reports made against someone's license in that
Oh,
state.
right.
But in order to make a report, and I can't drill this in enough, you have to know it's abuse.
Yeah,
And I consider myself, and many survivors consider themselves, as being indoctrinated into these
yeah.
programs through coercion and control. And so if I didn't realize that this was abuse until I was 33 years old, that's far past when I can really do anything about
Effectively do.
it. And so that's inherent in this industry, is the shield of non-transparency and indoctrination that really protects the abusers from ever having, lawsuits and things like that against them, and
So
reports.
I just want to be really clear. I'm not blaming you as a child for not being on the ball
Yeah,
and
no,
giving
of
you
course.
legal advice. And what I'm doing is I'm highlighting the issue because there will be people going through this right now, and they need to know that it is abuse, that I am
Correct.
saying very clearly as a health professional, I would never do this, right? And any health professional that does this to children should have their license removed and should face prosecution.
I
Just
agree,
really
100%.
simple,
Yep,
really
across the
simple.
board. Yep.
That's it. End of story. And if there's any health professionals listening to this involved in this industry, don't tell me that you are, because I will expose you. I won't tolerate this nonsense at all.
Love it. Love it.
Really appalled by this stuff. In fact, I sort of wrote an article about this general field and also the addiction treatment field. It's like
Yes,
you know exactly what I've just
I
said.
know exactly. Hey,
I,
if I had two industries that I could go
that's right.
after, and it didn't take all of my energy to do it on one, I would go after the addiction industry
Oh
as
no,
well. I mean,
no,
it's the rehab industry is out of
no.
control, just like this
I
one.
know it's like boom, boom,
I
boom,
know. It's
that
just
stuff.
all our systems.
I wrote an article about how horrified I am by that industry some time ago, and there are still
Mhm.
people in that industry that won't talk to me, and I'm glad they won't
Yeah.
because they revolt me. So I'm just like quite happy if you stay out of
Yep.
there, leave
Yep.
me alone. But
Hmm.
it's just like I mean I cannot tell you how horrified I am by this stuff. Anyway, let's try and make the point. So if you're listening to this, if you're a kid and you're listening to this and you're going through these treatment centers in Utah and in the Midwest and in the various states that tolerate them, it's really important to understand it is abuse. It's wrong. It shouldn't be happening to you. There's nothing wrong with you.
Yep.
And also, it's important to understand they don't work.
Right.
They're ineffective. They don't do what they say on the tin because they're not designed to work. They're designed to make as much money as possible and for as long
Correct.
as possible. That's all they're designed to do.
Yep.
They're profit industries that need you to be ill so that they can make more money out of you.
Right.
There's no
That's
investment. But
honestly the bottom line.
yeah, you're in this therapeutic. I hesitate to use that word. School. Again,
Yeah. I
really?
hesitate to use school as well.
Oh,
Just to be clear, it was
yeah.
not an education that I'm, yeah.
So how did you survive, Meg? How did you survive? What got you through, do you think?
Masking.
Was it?
Um, and honestly, just doing everything they told me to. And they were very clear in all of the attack therapy that I went through every single week that I needed to change who I was, or else no one would ever love me or accept me and want me. And so I did everything I could to change. And, looking back, I realized that I was really just masking. I was, I couldn't change fundamentally who I was. And I got through by just pretending, honestly.
Yeah. So you did what all abused children do, which is you blamed yourself. You
Correct.
thought there was something wrong with you, and you found ways of trying to cope with that sort of horrifying version of yourself that the world was
Right.
telling you existed, right?
Right.
When
Exactly.
did you realize, do you mind saying, when did you realize that it was wrong what had happened?
Not until I was like already a mom. I had four kids and I was like 33, 34 years old.
Right.
And I saw Paris Hilton's documentary, which really blew it open for me when I found
Yeah.
out the people that abducted her said the exact same words, word for word, as they said to me. And I realized, oh, wow, there isn't just a chrysalis and an Intermountain out there, it's a whole industry. And that's when my mind was really blown. And the second part when I woke up was really uh, taking, when you see your past through the lens of your own feelings about yourself and you've been told such negative things about yourself for your entire life, you tend to value yourself less and the narrative can kind of be not in your favor. But when you become a mom and you start to think about like I love these kids so much and then you start to think about them potentially being in your position that you were in, you start to see things a little different. So I viewed my time at Chrysalis as the best thing that ever happened to me. But when I put my daughter, let's say, and thought about, do I want my daughter sitting on her therapist's lap? No, that's abuse.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
okay. I feel
Yeah.
gross. Right. So because I have so much respect for her and I was still building it up for myself, you can see clearer. And I started realizing by doing that everything that I'd been through was abusive and I needed to take a look at it. And that's when I really started spiraling and in that CPTSD spiral. And then I really realized that a lot of my health issues, my physical health issues, my mental health issues were because of me pushing down all this trauma, pretending like it wasn't there and it wasn't trauma and I was perfectly fine.
Yeah. We should just say, so people who don't know, CPTSD means complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's
Yeah,
associated to people who experience long-term traumatic issues, particularly during developmentally important times in life. Not that there isn't a developmentally, but it's
right.
often given to children. Sometimes it's called developmental trauma as well.
Yeah.
Um, and so when did you get the CPTSD diagnosis?
Right after that. So I found an EMDR therapist
Right.
very clearly through the diagnostics. It was clear I had CPTSD.
Yeah.
And I really worked hard with the EMDR therapist, which was life changing, being able to do EMDR and taking
And
away a ton
again,
of
for
those
people who don't know,
triggers.
EMDR, eye movement desensitization
Yeah.
reprocessing. It's the gold standard for trauma treatment.
Yeah.
It's an evidence-based psychological therapy that's very effective at treating trauma symptoms. So, how did you know to ask, or was it you just stumbled onto this EMDR therapist? Or
So So in college, I was a psych major. I actually went into a clinical PsyD program as well. I wanted to be a psychologist, so I have a pretty big knowledge of
yeah,
psychological principles and understandings, and so I'm pretty up to date on the different treatments coming out. And I think what made me choose EMDR is because there was a mismatch between my brain and my body. There was a sever. And so my brain would feel fine, and all of a sudden my body would react as though there's a threat.
yes,
And my
quite.
heart would start to
It's just
raise, my heart rate would
started.
go up. And my
Yeah,
brain's like, why are you freaking out, body? There's nothing wrong. Like, I don't feel upset. Why is my body freaking out? So because of the disconnect, I realized that my body was processing trauma and my brain wasn't, and we needed to get it back on the same track. And realizing that it came from childhood, I thought it would be really important to focus on parts therapy and really, going to that 15-year-old and helping her understand that she's not at fault. It wasn't her fault. and just really kind of looking at the different parts of ourselves and treating them differently because I
Well,
think it
that's
does.
internal family systems. So you did
Yes,
IFS with the trauma work, which often people do.
correct.
So
Right.
you are sort of developing conversations with different aspects of yourself, different experiences in
Yeah,
as a way of processing and integrating and having a relationship to them in your mind so that there was some sense of sanity and understanding about what was.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Um, how long have you had treatment for and how successful has it been? Because I think it's really useful for people to understand this.
I think EMDR was transformational. And I knew as soon as I woke up that I wanted to be an activist in this space and kind of focused my entire life on helping take down these programs that are abusing kids.
Yeah.
And so I also knew though, I could not work in this space until I was processed. And I knew that I would hear a lot of worse things than I thought that I could imagine, and then I needed to be processed. So I actually did about anywhere from 3 to 4 hours of EMDR work a week for about 6 months, and that was transformational. And then I kind of left EMDR and now I've been in ACT therapy, which is acceptance commitment therapy, which is very good, I find, for my ASD because it's values based and acceptance of who I am. And I kind of like that. Everything's
Yeah.
based off of authenticity, valuing yourself, non-judgmental thoughts, and do making decisions based off of your morals and values.
Mind if I ask how old your kids are?
Yeah, so my youngest is 3.5, then 9, 11, and 13.
And what do they think of this new mum?
I mean, I don't know if they remember the old one,
Okay.
but I think that they're proud. Their mom just wrote a book and a memoir came out, and it's kind of cool. I'll always remember looking over on the couch and seeing my 11-year-old son read my book from front to back and just being like, it's important to me. I want my kids to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
know that what I went through, right? And be able
If
to,
we, just so people know this, if we don't tell our kids, they are doomed to repeat.
yeah, exactly.
That's
Exactly. I am committed to transparency with my children.
that's
And
right. The
I
way we
think
stop
that,
intergenerational transfer of abuse is we
right,
tell our kids about it in an appropriate manner, but we
right,
tell our kids about it, and then they can go, "Well, I don't want. I'll make a different choice." Thanks.
right. And I want them to also know that, like, I always talk about the bad things that happen. I don't shield them from things
Yeah.
that happen in our life and things that are sad. I cry in front of my kids. It's okay to
Oh,
be angry, like and I think that it's important for me as a survivor for them to know that they'll never have to go through that. Like
yeah.
I will never send them away. And that to me is really core to everything. So reading my book was really cool because I know that they feel safe and it's not going to happen to them.
So tell us, what's the book called?
So the book's called Becoming Unsilenced, Surviving and Fighting the Troubled Teen Industry.
Super. Wonderful. And
Yeah.
that's out at the moment, and people can get it through Amazon or,
Yeah, it's on Amazon. Yep. It's
well, we'll
in
make sure there's
Kindle
a link to it.
and on print. Yeah.
And do you have a group as well? Do you have an organization, a website and things like that that people can?
Yes. So I'm the CEO of Unsilenced, which obviously you can see the play on words with the book there. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Unsilenced. And our organization works to not only empower survivors of the troubled teen industry, but also, help stop these programs from continuing on. And also, we really work to help survivors get access to justice because that's something that really hasn't been provided to us. They kind of the world just kind of creates survivors and then there's no support systems, there's no justice, and we're kind of forgotten about. So it's really important for Unsilenced to be able to support in those ways.
And I should say, because after I sort of broke with the addiction treatment world, there were a number of people who tried to sort of attack me in various ways. Some of them
Oh
were
yeah.
obvious ones. And then there were other things that sort of made up complaints and things like that about my practice and stuff like that. Um,
Yep.
how have the powers that be been with you being so open about exposing the abuse? I imagine you've faced quite a lot of unpleasantness coming at you.
Yeah, that's putting it nicely. I think that, you know, um, I get unpleasantness from not only the programs, but also some survivors because
Yeah.
some, participants that don't agree that they were abusive and they think it's the best thing that ever happened to them still, which is valid. Their experiences are 100% valid. I don't want to take that away. But I definitely see that in a lot of the comments is, what are you doing? This place saved my life. And what I'm doing is just trying to ensure that every single program and every participant has the greatest experience, just like you did, right? We want to make sure that everyone across the board has good experiences in treatment. And if they're not, that's not treatment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I would go a bit further. I mean, I think they're cults that indoctrinate people. And when you attack a cult, their followers.
I would agree. So,
And that's how they get perpetuated, really.
yeah.
It takes very courageous people like yourself and Paris, I would say,
Hmm.
and people like you to sort of stand up and say these things. But people should know that it comes at a cost, which is you will be attacked.
Yeah. Right.
Um, and
I'm
that's the way
prepared.
it is. Well, it's the way it is, isn't it? So, good for you. You have a website people can get hold of you at?
Yeah. Yeah. If you want to know more about Unsilenced, you can go to unsilenced.org. Or if you want to learn more about me, everything that I'm doing and my book, you can go to megappelgate.com. And you can find everything there. And if you're a survivor of the troubled teen industry and want help or resources, Unsilenced is an incredible place to go. It's chock
Right,
full of everything. So,
right. And do you have a sort of social media presence as
yeah.
well?
Yep. You can find me on TikTok, Instagram. My handle is at Meg Applegate, and that's spelled Appelgate, which is oftentimes spelled wrong. But you can find me there. And then you can find Unsilenced as well on TikTok and on Instagram at unsilenced_now.
I'm going to go and follow you immediately after this conversation. So,
Perfect. Thank you.
look, it's been a genuine pleasure to have you on, and thank you so much for your courage and your bravery, not just to sort of speak out about this, but to heal. I mean, it takes a lot of
Yeah,
courage just to heal.
it does. It
So pass
does.
on the back for you for doing that.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. Really
Yeah, no,
appreciate
it's
it.
absolutely I wish it, I say my pleasure. I mean, it's a pleasure to meet you. I wish we'd been meeting because you wanted to tell me about a wonderful childhood
Yeah,
experience.
right.
Being
Exactly.
traumatized and tortured.
Exactly.
I'd have preferred it that way around.
Yeah,
But you've
exactly.
come through,
Right.
and you're making it possible that other children
Right.
don't have to
Yeah,
experience this. And you don't seem
exactly.
bitter and twisted, Meg.
No, I'm not.
Pretty
I'm
cool.
not. I don't have hatred. I just want to see change so no more kids can get hurt.
Great. It's wonderful. You stay there. Thanks. I hope you found this as illuminating. And people in England are just going to be totally shocked.
I
Just
know.
their
I
heads will
know.
just go, what?
I know.
It's just
America
like
has a lot of work
unreal.
to do.
It's unreal. It's like I'm like sitting there going, oh my God.
I know.
So whatever. It's great to have you here.
Great to
Fantastic
be here.
to hear your story. Fantastic to know you. And wonderful the work that you're doing to stop this industry in its tracks, and more
Yeah.
power to your elbow. Stay there.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us. And I'll see you next time at the show. Have a great evening.